Okay, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to a look into the Lute Vault. My name's Anna Trammell, and I am the Archivist and Special Collections Librarian at PLU, and I'm so glad to be joining you all today. Kathy Engel from the Office of Alumni and Student Connections is behind the scenes helping out today and has just done a phenomenal job at making this event, all these events this week for homecoming work online. And Kathy told me that Sunday of homecoming is typically the day that there would be an event for the Golden Club, which would be alums celebrating their 50th graduation anniversary or higher. So I really want to give a shout out to those members of the class of 1970 and above who may be joining us today. But the benefit of us being able to join these events virtually this week is that we can welcome all members of the PLU community to these talks. So welcome to all of you, and I really hope you've had the opportunity to tune in to some of the great lectures and webinars and events that have been held over the course of the week. So today I'm going to be showing you some highlights from the PLU archives and special collections, and that portion of today's events has actually been pre-recorded, so we'll be playing that for you shortly. Then once that has ended, we're going to have a little show and tell. So a couple of you have sent in some images, some photographs, and pictures of your own Lute memorabilia from your personal collections, and you've shared those with Kathy. So we are going to be displaying those and sharing some of the information that you sent in about those items. And then we are going to have time for a Q&A where you'll be able to ask me about the archives and special collections or anything that I've talked about today. So throughout the presentation, as questions come to mind, feel free to use the Q&A function and drop those questions in, and Kathy will be helping me behind the scenes navigate those, and I'll get to those at the end of our session today. And also, as we get the pre-recorded portion started, we'd love it if you could just use the chat and drop in your name, if you're an alum, your class year, and where you are tuning in from. So I am going to stop sharing my screen, and we are going to start the pre-recorded section of the session today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Anna Trammell, and I am the Archivist and Special Collections Librarian, which means that it's my job to preserve and provide access to archival records relating to the history and operations of Pacific Lutheran University and the library's rare and unique materials. So today I'm going to be sharing some highlights from the archives and special collections, and then I'll talk a little bit about how you can access and use materials like these. Then I'll be joining you for a live Q&A. The first items I'm going to share today are related to a story that those of you who have been involved with Buke Day celebrations in the past or have visited the Nesvig Alumni Center may be familiar with. Bucharstad was the founder and first president of Pacific Lutheran University. The university was facing really significant financial pressures in its early years due to an economic downturn and the debt incurred through the construction of Old Main, which is now known as Harstad Hall. Harstad was determined to do all he could to help the university overcome these financial challenges. So in February of 1898, Harstad and Parkland resident Otis Larson set sail on the SS City of Seattle for Dyea, Alaska, where they planned to join prospectors from all over the world in their search for gold in the Yukon region. It was Harstad's intention to establish a successful gold claim that would alleviate PLU's debt and even fund future operations. So here we see a receipt documenting Harstad's freight that was taken aboard the SS City of Seattle steamer. The list includes boxes of groceries, a tub of butter, a saw, and other tools. And these are the mucklucks that Harstad wore while searching for gold. These are also a part of our collection and donated to the university by the Harstad family in the 1990s. Harstad documented his journey in letters that were published in the Pacific Herald, which was PLU's newspaper at the time. The letters were translated later from the Norwegian in the 1950s by Oliver Harstad. These are extremely detailed and provide a real sense of what Harstad was experiencing throughout the different stages of his journey. So I'm going to read a portion of a letter that Harstad wrote after setting up camp in late February 1898. We have now lived here in the woods a week and a half. We have not heard a word from our homes since we left, but we try to believe that everything is well at home, just as it was when we left our dear ones. We live above all expectations well, yet everyone will understand that we are not on a pleasure trip. The entire first week after we were settled in our little tent, the weather was raw and stormy. A cold north wind blew night and day. One day, the thermometer went to 10 below zero. To live in a tent in the middle of winter in 10 below zero weather is not exactly a pleasure. Our tent is 8 by 10 feet with a 3-foot wall. 2 people live in this house, have their bed and stove, in addition to all their provisions for 1 year and an ample supply of shoes, clothes, and tools. The stove stands to the right of the entrance. Under and around it lies wet wood and material for sleds. Both our gold pans stand on edge by the stove. One is used as a dishpan, the other as a washpan. If they shall ever see gold, lies in the hand of God. Harstad returned to Parkland in late summer of 1899, having left his claim in the care of a fellow prospector who stayed on in the Yukon. He had also set up a lunch house 8 miles outside of Dawson City, which funded his gold search. Unfortunately, the claims never actually produced any gold for the university. A prospector named Otis Lee, who had befriended Harstad, gifted him with this set of 14-point moose antlers that have a spread of over 5 feet while they were together in the Yukon. In 1975, these antlers were presented to the university by the Harstad family, and today they're displayed in the Nesvig Alumni Center, as you see here, as a reminder of Harstad's journey. One of the earliest faculty members hired at PLU was Carlo Sperati, who taught music and led several choirs and bands in the Tacoma community and at the university beginning in 1894. In 1896, as a way to draw attention to the new university and its impressive music program, Sperati led the PLU band to the 10,000-foot level of Mount Rainier. So here's the group stopping for a photo while on their hike. Once they were at the 10,000-foot mark, they performed "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God." And here are some snowshoes worn by the band members and one of the instruments that they played that we have as part of our collection. Our next story is much more recent, and one that those of you who are celebrating your 50th class reunion this year will likely recall. The war in Vietnam led to widespread protest across the United States. On May 4th, 1970, the National Guard was called in to disperse student protesters at Kent State University in Ohio. 4 university students were shot and killed by the National Guard. Outrage over their deaths led to mass demonstrations on college campuses, including at PLU. Working with students at the University of Puget Sound, Tacoma Community College, and local high schools, PLU students organized a strike and rally in response. So here you see a poster that was used by students during these demonstrations. And here's a flyer that was posted on campus with details about the event. So you can see here that students across these local schools were planning to walk out of classes and then gather for a rally at Wright Park. This local strike was part of a national student strike movement on May 8th. The PLU faculty actually voted against completely canceling classes on that day in support of the strike, but President Wigman circulated an all-campus memo indicating that students should follow their conscience on that day and would not be penalized for missing classes. So after the May 8th strike, an ad hoc committee that was made up of students and faculty formed to develop a plan for how PLU could respond to the war in Vietnam in a productive way. So what they proposed was a 3-day event called the National Crisis Forum to be held during exam week in place of regular finals. The proposal was approved by the faculty, the student body, and the Board of Regents. President Wigman made clear that the university wasn't closing, but rather it was meeting the crises of the day with opportunities for dialogue. So between May 18th and May 20th, students, faculty, staff, and community members participated in the forum, and it consisted of panels, small group discussions, film screenings, presentations from guest speakers, and what they called soapbox sessions. Here's an image of a student participating in a discussion session. There were also several teleconversation events held in which a guest speaker would call in and their voice would be projected to the crowd by microphone. So here is President Wigman holding the phone and speaking to Senator George McGovern during one of these sessions. McGovern had publicly opposed US involvement in Vietnam since 1963, and he would go on to run as the Democratic candidate against Richard Nixon in 1972. Tacoma News Tribune reporter Jack Wilkin wrote, "As a professional newsman, I was impressed with the professionalism of the PLU authorities who had devised on such short notice programs that reached out to take advantage of the crisis in order to help students educate themselves. And as a person interested in university education, I was struck by the creativeness of several of the individual study projects going on those 3 days, projects that took at least as much work as conventional exams." PLU has actually had 2 alums summit Mount Everest. PLU grad Chris Chandler and his teammate Bob McCormick became the 56th and 57th people to summit the mountain in 1976. Luther Jerstad, who was a member of the class of 1958, was part of the first American expedition to the top of Mount Everest in 1963. The journal that he kept during the expedition that you see here is part of our collection. And in addition to writing here about his experience and reflections over the course of the trip, he also included detailed records of his location, the weather, and how he was feeling each day. This journal was later published as a book called Everest Diary. We also hold the backpack he used during the expedition, in addition to his boots, oxygen mask, and other climbing gear. Some of our most frequently used materials in the archives are our student publications. These document campus events and activities through a student's perspective, and that provides a really valuable insight into the PLU student experience and how that experience has changed and remained the same over time. Many of you will likely be familiar with the Mooring Mast. This is PLU's student-run newspaper. The first issue, and that's what you're seeing here, appeared in 1924. There had been newspapers published by the university before this and a few shorter term student-led projects, but this was really the first time students had been involved with planning and creating a complete newspaper that was meant to document the university and reflect student perspectives and interest. The newspapers always had a faculty advisor, but students managed advertising, subscriptions, writing, editing, everything. And when the paper began, student reporters were appointed in the following areas: general news, campus news, Parkland, organizations, religious, music, and athletics. The name for the paper comes from a large mooring structure at nearby Fort Lewis for the Navy airship, the USS Shenandoah. And the newspaper is still published today under the shortened name of the Mast. The Saga, PLU's yearbook, was published annually between 1930 and 1999. Also student-run, the yearbook includes photos of campus events and activities, student organizations, residence halls, and individual students and faculty. So these are particularly helpful for me when I need to find out more information about a specific individual who attended PLU. The earliest student publication was called The Hurricane, and it was produced by the Lyceum Student Literary Society beginning in 1901. For the first several years of the publication, it was handwritten, as you see here in the first issue on the left. And later it was produced as a booklet like the version that you see on the right. This included essays, opinion pieces, poetry, humor, and creative writing. The first editor of The Hurricane was actually Oscar Tingelstad, who would go on to serve as university president. And The Hurricane was published from 1901 until 1915. In 1963, PLU's annual opening convocation featured a very notable speaker, President John F. Kennedy, who was on a conservation tour across the Western United States. This event was a joint convocation for PLU and University of Puget Sound students held at Cheney Stadium. He spoke on September 27th, 1963, just 2 months before his death. And he was joined by PLU President Robert Mortvedt, US Senators Warren Magnuson and Henry Scoop Jackson, Washington Governor Albert Rossellini, and Secretary of the Interior Stuart Udall. The crowd was standing room only, with nearly twice as many attendees as there were seats available. So now I'd like to play a short clip from JFK's address, and this has been digitized and made available by the JFK Presidential Library and Museum.
I'm glad to be here with the students from these two schools. This country has placed particular emphasis from its beginning, from the time of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, on educating our children, not merely to help them, but most importantly because we realized that the free democratic system of government, which places more burdens on the individual than any other system, must depend in its final analysis upon an informed citizen. And here in these schools and colleges of this state, and the others stretching across the United States, we are trying to build and develop men and women who can maintain in a difficult and hazardous and dangerous and changing world a free system of government. Winston Churchill once said, democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the other systems that have been tried. It is the most difficult. It demands more from us. And here in these schools and colleges, we hope that we're developing those qualities, which in other days of change and challenge will permit this country to be guided through. The problems we face today have never been so complex. They cannot possibly be solved in Washington, D.C., unless we have supporting us in our two political parties and informed citizen.
So as I mentioned earlier, in addition to preserving records relating to the history of PLU, as I've been discussing so far, the Archives and Special Collections is also the home of the library's rare and unique materials. Some of these have been gifted to the library, and some were a part of the library's initial collection or the personal collections of university presidents and professors dating back to the university's beginning. This Torah Scroll was donated to the university in 2008. It was created in a Jewish scriptorium in the late 17th or very early 18th century in Morocco. It's handwritten in Hebrew on strips of tanned leather that have been sewn together, and it's made up of over 200 of these columns. Some of the repairs that have been made over the years are visible, but overall it's in quite good condition considering that it would have been created for regular use. I'm often asked, what's the oldest item in our collection? And this is it. It dates back to 1524, and it's a psalter. That includes the Book of Psalms with some related commentary and devotional material by Johannes Bugenhagen. Bugenhagen was a major figure in the Lutheran movement of northern Germany and Scandinavia, and actually served as a pastor to Martin Luther. You can see in these images the hand-illustrated cover page, the bronze working clasp, and the detailed hand-tooled cover design. Our Scandinavian Immigrant Experience collection is one of the largest sets of materials, and this collection includes records from local Scandinavian cultural heritage organizations, some local Scandinavian publications, and some related personal and family papers. The centerpiece of this collection is the result of the work of former PLU professor Janet Rasmussen. For her book, New Land, New Lives, Scandinavian Immigrants in the Pacific Northwest, Professor Rasmussen mounted a really impressive oral history project. Nearly 300 oral histories were recorded with people from Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden, who immediately or eventually settled in the Pacific Northwest, mostly between 1900 and 1930. In these interviews, they talk about their lives, traditions, families, occupations, and provide a really thorough and unique snapshot of this community. These oral histories have been digitized and are available with partial transcripts through our collections database. And that brings me to our next topic. So now that I've introduced you to some highlights of our collection, I want to talk to you a bit about how you can access and utilize materials like these. So we recently launched a new collection management system where you can search descriptions of our physical materials and access our digitized photographs and publications. So I'm going to demonstrate that for you now. You can access these by going to archives.plu.edu. And this site is continually being updated with new content. So if you search for a topic and you can't find what you're looking for, please check back or reach out to us and we may be able to help you out with that. So here you can see that our collection is separated into 4 main areas. I just talked about the Scandinavian Immigrant Experience collection, and you may be interested in the university archives, our records relating to PLU. So if I click on one of these collection areas, then I'll be taken to a guide page, and here I can find some quick links to some of our most notable or heavily used materials, including presidential papers, departmental records, etc. So I'm going to open this link here. These are the Bucharstad Papers. So I can see a listing of all of the materials that we have physically in the archives related to Bucharstad. And if anything has been scanned and made available online, then I can also access that through this portal. So I discussed earlier today Bucharstad's trip to the Yukon, and the translations that I read from, those have been digitized and they are available in this database. So you can click on that thumbnail to see the entire document if you're interested in taking a look at that. So going back to the guide page, in addition to some of these personal papers and departmental materials, we also have many, many digitized photographs. You can see here photographs that are associated with homecoming and browse through those. Many of the publications that I mentioned today have been digitized, and those are available online and searchable, including the mooring mast. So here you can scroll through the different editions or navigate to the year that is of interest. And again, clicking on this thumbnail will show you the whole publication. So going back to our main page here, I can also search in our collection and enter keywords, a person's name, the name of a place, and I will see results, both physical materials that we have in the archives and anything that's been digitized. I can also browse the collection by subject, place, or digital objects. So these are those digitized materials. So I hope that you will visit archives.plu.edu and browse our collection. There's some additional search tips here, and you can always contact us at archives@plu.edu if you have any questions. Please also visit our website, plu.edu/archives. Here you can learn more about some of our policies and services, our different collection areas, and you can view some of our digital exhibits and research resources. We have 2 interactive timelines here. One is related to the experience of Black students, faculty, and staff at PLU, and this was created in collaboration with the Black Student Union. You can also view our university timeline, which takes you decade by decade, and you can scroll through and take a look at some notable events from each year, 1890 to 2019. You are welcome to contact me. I'm going to be joining you shortly for a Q&A, but if you have any questions about the archives and our collections, or possibly if you're considering donating to the archives, we're always working with alumni to add to our holdings, alumni papers and publications. So please get in touch with us. You can email us at archives@plu.edu, or you can contact me directly. Here's my email address and phone number. So thank you so much for joining me, and I will be talking to you shortly. Thank you.
Okay. So we've received a few questions that have come in, so please continue using that Q&A function to add your questions. But before we get to those, I just want to share with you some of the photos that were sent in by a couple of members of the class of 1970. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. Okay, I'm just gonna go back to the beginning here. All right, so as I mentioned, we received a couple of photographs from the personal collections of two members of the class of 1970, both nursing graduates. And these first two images were sent in to us from Marilyn Finn. And this is her nursing uniform that she still has. And here it's being modeled by Marilyn's granddaughter. So I imagine that many of you may remember these uniforms, and I was really excited to hear that Marilyn has held on to hers over the last 50 years. So thank you, Marilyn, for sharing these with us. We also received some really wonderful images from Ruth Arp Meineke, class of 1970. And Ruth told us that these images were taken by Lynn Small. And Ruth said, "We wore white pinafores over a blue pin feather dress. The buttons on both articles were removable and held in place by metal clips." And here's a few more images that Ruth sent us, including this one of the class of 1970 pinning ceremony. It looks like here they're wearing those classic white uniforms. And unfortunately, Ruth says that her nursing cap must have been discarded in her last move, but she sent us these two pictures here of her wearing that nursing cap. And she said, traditionally, RNs wore a black velvet ribbon on their caps, but PLU got fancy and added a gold ribbon, so we had our school colors on the caps. The student cap had the two ribbons on the corner of the cap. And she went on to tell us, "No one wears those dumb caps anymore, thank goodness. They were always getting caught on the curtains around the beds or getting grabbed by kids." So thank you, Ruth. Kathy and I very much enjoyed seeing your photographs and hearing some of your memories. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and take a look at some of your questions. Okay, and like I said, feel free to keep those coming in the Q&A. So we did receive a couple of questions that I'm going to take a look at now. So Wendy Call asked us, with the current COVID restrictions, what access do members of the PLU community have to the materials in the PLU archives? So this is a good question. Of course, we haven't digitized all of the materials in our collections. We have millions of pages worth of documents. So not all of that content is available online. However, we are open by appointment for questions that we are unable to answer remotely. So if there is something that you're interested in taking a look at, we may be able to scan the necessary documents and send it to you. And if it's a more extensive request, then we are arranging for some limited on-site visits right now. But the good news is that we have quite a bit of digitized content. So I demonstrated our holdings database, which you can access at any time at archives.plu.edu. And there we have many, many digitized photographs and publications. So most of the university publications like the Mooring Mast and the Saga that I mentioned, also very early publications going back to 1890 like the University Herald, those have been digitized and added to our database. So we do have quite a bit of content that you can access. But again, I'm going into the archives a couple times a week to scan documents for questions that we receive if the relevant materials haven't already been digitized. So let's see. We have another question. I've used the archives to research 1960s back issues of the Mooring Mast. Some of these are very difficult to read. Is there any way they could be made clearer? So yes, unfortunately, as technology has improved over time, that's meant that some of our content that's been digitized in the past is not as clear as some of the more recently digitized materials. So the mooring mast, there are some issues that are somewhat difficult to read. It can vary issue to issue. So you may look at one issue of the mooring mast and it's crystal clear, and another one where maybe some of the words or images are pretty blurry. So unfortunately, we're not able to rescan all of that content at this time. However, our new collection management system makes it much easier to navigate these publications. So if you, so in the past, the old database that we were using, you had to enter into each separate issue to conduct a search. Now in this new database, you can search across all issues of the mooring mast or all digitized publications for a particular phrase or word, and you'll see where the results are in those actual documents. So it is much easier to search them. Oftentimes I will use these to find exactly what I'm looking for. So I may find that a headline is legible, but perhaps the smaller print is not totally clear, but that helps me know what physical issue I need to look at. So if you are having trouble, we can rescan documents by request. So if there's one issue that you found that you really want to take a look at and it's just not clear online, then please email me and we will see what we can do to get that scanned for you. Okay, and another question. So someone is asking about the hurricane. So that is that first PLU student publication that I mentioned. So again, this was published by a student literary society. And those have actually not been digitized. They are quite fragile, particularly those first few handwritten issues. So we haven't scanned those, but that is on our radar, and that is something that we would like to digitize in the future. So they were kind of written out on this large legal size notebook paper, and the first 4 or 5 years of that publication, those were handwritten several times, and then the handwritten copies were distributed. So those are not currently available in our database, but certainly on our radar. We want to make sure that the actual text of these documents, that it's searchable, and that's difficult to do when it's written, when it's handwritten in cursive. So that would require a good bit of effort on our part to actually transcribe those and make them searchable. But that is on our radar, and hopefully we will digitize those in the future. Let's see. So we have a question. What are some of the most unusual items you have in archives? This is a good question. We have lots of surprising items in the archives, lots of interesting artifacts that have been donated by various alums over the years. We also have, so in addition to documenting the history of PLU and some of the other collections that I mentioned, like the Scandinavian Immigrant Experience Collection, our general special collections are kind of a catch-all for rare and unique materials that we add to our holdings. So in the special collections, we have a number of items just related to the general Tacoma and Parkland community. One of our most interesting recent acquisitions was from a local high school teacher who was from Germany. And she came to the US and taught in high school for a number of years. And she grew up in Germany and actually saw the fall of the Berlin Wall. And she had a big piece of the wall that she just kept with her personal collection for years, and would bring out and show to her students. And a couple of years ago, she returned to Germany and was looking for a home for her personal papers and this large piece of the Berlin Wall. And she decided to donate those to the PLU archives. And that's been a really fun item to use in classes and to get students to actually be able to touch and handle this big chunk of concrete. It's got some pieces of rebar coming out of it, and being able to look at that and kind of compare it to some of the letters and some of the other documents that she donated to us that help provide context to that artifact. Okay, and one more question. Does the archives show the percentage of the student body who were Lutherans from 1890 and successive years or decades, including the most recent percentage? So that's a pretty involved research request, so I can't answer that off the top of my head. I know that over the years, different information about students have been tracked, and it kind of varies by year what information the university has gathered about students. So it's difficult to say if the information about the percentage of the student body who identified as Lutherans was something that was consistently tracked year to year. However, I have seen some student surveys and some enrollment data, particularly in the early years, that kind of gets to this question, but I'm not sure if we would have that data for each year. But Philip, who asked that question, if you want to follow up with me, that's certainly something that I can do some further research on and see what kind of information I can find for you. And let's see, I think we have a couple of questions in the chat. Let's see. So Marilyn, we showed the images of Marilyn's granddaughter modeling her nursing uniform, and she's asked if that would be something that we would be interested in having for the archives. And that's certainly something we would be interested in. As I mentioned, we're always working with alumni and current students and faculty to acquire materials related to the history of PLU. And of course, we can't accept everything. A lot of people, are interested in donating things like the saga or the mooring mast. And because of our limited space, we have to, limit those holdings to just one copy of each year of the saga. But we really value, some textiles and three-dimensional artifacts like nursing uniforms and sports uniforms and things like that, because they're really interesting for people to see when we use them in exhibits or take them into some of the PLU classes that we work with. It's those three-dimensional artifacts that really grab people's attention, and then we can use that as an occasion to sort of talk about what archival research looks like and to bring in some of the other contextual clues about those artifacts. So, for example, with something like a nursing uniform, having that be kind of what grabs a student's attention, and then using that to make connections, using other items in the archives like photographs. We have a large collection of digitized scrapbooks from the School of Nursing. So yes, if you have anything that you think would be of interest to the archives related to your experience at PLU, please get in touch with me and we'd love to hear from you. Okay. I believe, unless Kathy lets me know that there may be any more questions. Okay. So Kathy is telling me that is all the questions that we've received. So again, I would love to hear from you. Both if you have questions about the archives or about topics in university history, or if you're interested in donating something to the archives, please get in touch. Again, you can contact us at archives@plu.edu, and you can search our collections at archives.plu.edu. And before we jump off, I have a couple of items that I just wanted to show to you if you are interested in learning more on your own about PLU history. There have actually been a couple of really great books that I would recommend to you. Some of you have probably seen these before. Educating for Service, which is by Philip Norquist. This documents the university's history from 1890 to 1990. As you can see, I've got bookmarks in my copy and it's dog-eared. I use this as a resource very frequently, and it's just a fun read if you're interested in learning more about PLU history. So if you're interested in trying to obtain a copy of this, you can also get in touch with me. And there is a newer version also by Philip Nordquist that documents PLU history 1988 to 2008. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope to hear from some of you in the future. Thank you.